Welcome back, everyone, to Vox Markets. My name is Paul Hill, and I'm delighted today to have special guest Sarah Barrington, CEO of Verici Dx, and non-exec Barbara Murphy, who actually, I think, invented a large swathe of the company's technology. Now, Verici is a next generation immuno-diagnostics firm specializing in the global organ donor market, but specifically focusing initially on the $700 million kidney transplant sector. So welcome, ladies.
Well, we're delighted to be here. Thank you very much, Paul.
Now, massive congrats on today's IPO, raising £14.5 million at 12p. In these markets, that's a pretty good achievement. Anyway, I never sort of like took O-level biology, so this is sort of like, you know, new science to me. Can you just briefly take us through what a kidney does in the body, what the difficulties are with sort of transplants, and then a bit more, obviously, on what the company's technology aims to do?
Yeah, certainly. So a kidney, very simply, is well known as a filter in the body. It's also a regulator. So it filters through all the waste, and it helps with blood pressure and to regulate the salts and minerals in the body. So a very important function. Obviously,
just quickly, Sarah, if it fails, what happens to the person?
Well, obviously, they die.
Okay,
so
right.
This is
So it's pretty severe.
I was going to say that actually, you know, people are familiar with the fact that you can survive. There are two kidneys, and there are people that survive with one kidney. And so, you know, this is a source of living donors where, say, a family member may donate one of their kidneys if it's a good match to a family member. So, you know, obviously the kidneys are a vital organ in the body. With kidney disease, if it progresses onto something like dialysis, so that effectively we're outsourcing that filtering function to a machine, that's a very poor quality of life for people. They're having to spend hours in the clinic, and it's a miserable existence. So hence the need for transplants. This is where they go in and obviously replace the organs. And then something that's very important to the body, which is, of course, the immune system, is also a transplant's main enemy, because obviously the body is saying this is an alien organ, an alien thing in the body, I must reject it. So for the clinician, what they're trying to do is make sure that they can get acceptance of that organ in the body by the immune system over time. And that is really the fundamental you know, proposition of this company, which is to say, how can we help clinicians in that treatment, and how do we understand what the immune system is likely to do, to react, how strong it is, how it is attacking the organ, so that the clinician can treat accordingly.
And on that predictive side, how does it actually sort of, well, how does the science work? Just very quickly, I don't want to go into sort of like the deep sort of, you know, biotech stuff, but just as in a nutshell, when you mentioned the sort of immuno sort of like sequencing, that sort of stuff, how does it actually just work?
Yeah, so I'll give the layperson's interpretation of that, and then we'll bring in the inventor herself, Barbara. So from the lay perspective, really what you're looking for is you want a test that says, okay, through a gene panel, through the sequencing, how do I measure how aggressive that immune system in that specific patient is likely to be? So if it's likely to be very aggressive, then obviously what we're looking for is for the clinician to use it. Basically, they treat through these very large drugs called immunosuppressant drugs. They suspend the immune system. These are not small things. And if they have a very aggressive immune system, they're looking to have a very high dosage and maybe for longer. And if it's fairly benign, if it's likely to be quite accepting of that transplant, then they know that they can taper that down quite quickly. Barbara, did you want to add anything to my layperson's version of this?
I mean, it's exactly it. That's exactly it. The question is, we currently have no good guidance as to who is a high responder, who's a low responder, and we pretty much protocolize our approach to prescribing immunosuppression to transplant patients.
And how have you actually sort of mapped the somebody's immune system, or how do you actually sort of like take the sort of like map somebody's immune system, presumably from sequencing or something like that, and then compare it to how you think their immune system will react using sort of base data? How does that technology work, Barbara?
So what we've done is we've looked at global gene expression in a recipient's blood before the transplant and correlated that with outcomes in a large multi-center study to develop an algorithm, identify genes, develop an algorithm that says this is a high responder, this is a low responder, and then we went back into a second cohort of patients and we validated. So I say we, that's we in the lab before we became we in Verici, so that we can say this person is a high or low responder. This person is likely to have an acute rejection after transplant. This person is has a very low likelihood of having acute rejection after a transplant, with the aim to tailor their immunosuppression based on that clarification or based on that assessment.
And is any existing competition used immuno-mapping to do this? Because immunotherapy and any sort of everything is such a holy grail now of medicine in sort of cancer and all kinds of stuff, and it's really sort of like leading edge stuff from my layman's understanding. So when you talk about sort of like mapping the immune system, sort of mapping for this sort of success on transplant, I'd imagine nobody else is anywhere near this.
In transplant, there's no other assay in this area at all.
Yeah. And then sort of what are the initial studies then? What sort of like level of performance increase or improvement are you seeing against existing tests, if there are tests, in fact?
So what we do currently is we use broad clinical parameters to define someone as a high or low immunological risk individual. They are very broad. They are someone of African-American descent, though we know that that by no means clarifies things. Somebody who is pediatric candidate, someone's had a previous transplant. The only biomarker per se is if a recipient has an antibody to their donor. And that's about 10% of potential recipients. So that's a group that we call highly sensitized patients. So they're a very small group, they're very specific, and it's not generalizable to the larger transplant group.
Okay, and then sort of like Sarah, in terms of the actual the scale and the opportunity with these tests, etc. Presumably, it's a pre-diagnosis. It's basically a predictive measure, and also once somebody's had a transplant, I'd assume you could use the same technology to help clinicians when there's sort of like how the body's reacting to it to see what level of immunosuppressant they should actually use. Is that correct, or?
Yeah, there are two leading products. So, you know, the predictive test is what we're calling Clarava. It has no competition. You just heard from Barbara that really the comparison is clinical factors, which is, you know, really the toss of a coin type of performance. So nothing particularly there. And for us, the opportunity is obviously looking at the number of transplants there are. There are about 95,000 transplants done annually. This is a figure that is set to increase, and we could go into that. But, you know, essentially, if you took that figure and then you understood that, you know, clinicians can see at least 2 times where this would be very applicable to use, obviously right, you know, close to the transplant itself. But further down the line, when people on transplants for anywhere, on the list for anywhere up to 10 years, Obviously, this is an important thing as they come onto the list, as they change over time. This is a fairly dynamic situation. So we see that opportunity as being basically at least twice. And of course, the annual is an annualized figure, not a sort of 10-year view or anything like that. So, you know, that's you know, just under 300 million per annum, because obviously we're looking at a renewable figure every year. The other, you alluded to this, and we do have another product, and this is looking at damage about 3 months in, or certainly post-transplant. At the moment, that time point is 3 months, but there is a time continuum over there post-transplant that the clinician is looking for damage at the point that it's happening. And that, again, is, you know, we've assumed in our addressable market, there are no published reliable figures on this. We've done our own estimations. But again, you were saying, okay, the clinician is going to use this at least twice. If you ask Barbara, she'll say that's understated. In her practice, in her peer group, she can see this happening, you know, at least 4 times, but we said 2. And again, that sort of gives you just over 300 million per annum, because this is a test that's going to be used at multiple time points.
So I mean, in summary, then, the technology improves the success rate of a transplant. It improves patient outcomes because you match it even better, and it takes people off dialysis machines, and presumably allows more people to have successful transplants. So increases the population. Okay, right, you've sold me on it. How is it actually protected? Now, if you invented it, Barbara, and you're a non-exec, that's great. So, but how's the technology? Is it sort of licensed in? Is it sort of like, how does it work?
Yeah, so let me take that one, Paul. Back in 2018, actually, Renalytics licensed this from Mount Sinai, and when it was spun out, that's where the license came to Verici. Right. That license is for over 4 core patents. Fairly standard terms, but it's very important that it comes from Barbara's lab and at Mount Sinai all the way through to this kind of commercial reality. And Mount Sinai are a fantastic strategic partner with us in that.
Okay, brilliant. Okay, so in terms of sort of like commercials, you just raised £14.5 million. So well done. The big question now is, where are you going to spend the money?
Yeah, our point is really to get to our next set of real milestones. To me, this is about getting to commercial proof of concept. So our first revenues. So where we spend the money is everything is directed towards that. You know, so we have a 12-month validation trial coming up. That's over 10 centers and will be for both of the products. Once we have that, we then go into commercialization efforts. That's a regulatory path. You have to get clearance. We're going through what they call a lab developed test. It's under the CLEAR system in the US. The most important thing for us is that's quite a simple path. It's not going through the FDA. As you know, at the moment, the FDA are rather overloaded with COVID. So we're quite happy that we do not have to go through there to get to our commercial. And then we will have a central lab in the US. That's where we'll do all our testing. And further down the line, we want to open one in the EU as well for central processing there. That would be under a CE mark. But, you know, essentially all the activities, all the funds are going towards supporting that. So, for example, right at the back end, we will start thinking about our reimbursement strategy, which we can start applying for at the end of those trials.
That's with Medicare, is it? That's Medicare.
It's Medicare, yes, under the CMS. But it's a body of data that you'll need in any area. So, for example, if I was in the UK getting into the NICE guidelines, I still need my health economics model. I still need my utility studies and, you know, training sets, etc. And so everything that we're doing is geared up behind that sort of commercial proof of concept and first sales.
And what's the sort of what's the goal of the validation study over the next 12 months? And how is it basically just rubber stamping what we've done in the lab so far, or is there actually, you know, it's a larger patient population, it's sort of like, you know, a higher bar that we're raising, or is it, I mean, how should investors think about the sort of that milestone?
That's right. So Barbara already did a very large study called the GO-CAR study that was used into getting us to this point. And it was a very large data set. It was also multi-center and across a wide demographic base. So, to us, that's covered a lot of the questions you're going to get to, how is this going to perform in the clinic? But if you're looking at having to go into approvals through a regulatory system, you do need to have a certain set of criteria. It's what we would call a blinded confirmatory study. So basically, I'm going to go in under a set protocol with a hypothesis that we've already formed and kind of tested to date, but be able to, in a blinded, regulated way, be able to confirm what we already know. And so that's ability to come out and say, okay, this is our clinical performance that we can use in our claims going forward when we make sales.
Okay, so let's assume it succeeds in validation, it hits its desired outcomes. It gets approved because it's a huge untapped market, no doubt about it, by the sort of the FDA or the regulatory bodies. And it's sort of like equally because it's a big increase or a huge improvement on the existing technologies, it then gets Medicare cover, etc. Now, I can see the predictive side hasn't got a competitor, so that one sounds like a pretty easy market to address at sort of like $300 million or whatever that sort of level is. But the sort of the post transplant side of it, the Tutala, I think you mentioned that was called, that side has got incumbents. What's the strategy to sort of like dislodge existing players in that area?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the interesting thing is that there's a very core difference in technology. And, that does result in quite a lot of differences in performance. And obviously, for clinicians, they're looking for a very high performing and clinically relevant test. And I think we can prove that. So if I take a step back, our competitors use a technique called cell-free DNA. That's what they're measuring. To me, in lay terms, it's effectively measuring the debris in the blood. So what it's doing is it's measuring cell death. And the problem with that is it can come from many areas. So you are looking for cell death coming from kidney damage. It may be coming from a passing infection. And so at the moment, our competitors have this issue where they are what they call a rule out test. They're very, very good at saying there's no cell death, you are okay. But they're very bad at saying, okay, we see cell death, but what does it really mean? Now, if you compare with our test, because we are directly measuring what is happening in real time, we're giving clinicians actionable data. So for them, they're looking for a very highly performing test, which we are. We're both in the 90s, very well balanced in sensitivity and specificity. That's something they're looking for. But also very important is that we're very high in what they call PPV. Now, what this means is this is actionable data. This is data to the clinician that says, yes, you've got to go and do something. So in transplant care, where you're pretty sure you're going to have, the organ under assault, you want to have a good reason to say, yes, you need to do something. And that's what our test really offers the clinician. Additionally, we also believe that not only is that high performing, but we're looking at pricing the test to encourage what we say is a monitoring modality. So at the moment, the current tests are a little bit one and done. The price point is high. There are a lot of clinicians feel that they could really only use it once at the 3-month stage. We're meeting this need to use it at multiple time points. And we'd like to hit that straight on because we know that that's the real need. And we want to partner with clinicians to really help them with their clinical decisions. Yeah,
and I guess putting it into sort of like a bigger context, if I've had a transplant, then my health, etc. If it doesn't work or I don't know what's causing me problems, is going to give me terrible outcomes. And then you add that to the cost and the amount of medical resource put into me to be able to get a new transplant, then you can see the human benefits as well as the financial benefits, because a transplant must cost tens of thousands of dollars to do and to succeed and stuff.
Well, you're right. In fact, actually, the cost of a transplant is in the States is just about under $500,000. It's $443,000.
Wow.
Right. And then, you know, let's look at that cost, which is the direct cost. Now, if it fails, you're back on dialysis. And most people spend between 3 and 5 years on dialysis. That's an annual cost of $88,000. And it's miserable. No patient wants to go back to that. We don't want to send people back to dialysis.
So effectively, the cost benefit of this improvement in being able to improve the patient outcomes is a no-brainer. I think would be a layman's way of actually putting it. So just I won't hold you to any of this, Sarah, because it's impossible to say. But if we were just sort of like putting a hypothetical blue sky scenario, and there's a sort of like I've seen a figure somewhere about $700 million, which is just the global kidney transplant market. Both that's pre-transplant and post-transplant. What sort of like indicative market share would you or the company, be looking to achieve over, I don't know, 5 or 10 years?
Yes, substantial. I think it's always useful to look at your competitors and how they've managed to penetrate the market. CareDx, for example, within a couple of years, we're able to, there's about 236 transplant centers in the US, and they're in roughly 180 of them within about 2 or 3 year period. Clearly this is an area that's looking for blood-based technologies. That's where they've done the heavy lifting, which is moving clinicians away from tissue-based into blood-based. But, given the desire for high-performing, more actionable tests, I can see us being able to, have a very similar type of penetration into that and to the EU market. Very similar idea is that the EU market is also centralized into these transplant centers. And effectively, you're going in at the, business level and discussing with the entire center the benefits of adopting your technology.
Okay, well, I'm just going to throw a couple of, just for the benefit of investors, a couple of sort of like numbers. Big. If we've got a $700 million market and we do 10%, that's pretty easy maths. It's even I can do that, $70 million. And these type of businesses, looking at your competitor CareDx, trades at about sort of 10 times sales. So 10, easy maths, 10 times 70 gives you back to $700 million. That's about £500 million compared to a market cap today of about 30, I think. So I think we can all agree that there's significant upside if you, hopefully the company can get this one right. Just Barbara, a quick one for yourself. I noticed the advisory science board of the business is like a who's who of the kidney world, and you included.
It is.
How have you managed to sort of get that level of expertise guiding the business? I mean,
there's a fantastic group of people. I'm actually incredibly chuffed that this group of people have agreed to participate. You've got the past president, you have 2 past presidents of the Transplant Society, 3 past presidents, and a current president of the American Society of Transplantation, past president of the Canadian Society of Transplantation, one of the preeminent transplant immunologists in the world, Catherine Wood. I mean, it's just a wonderful group of people. Several of these people I've worked with as part of the GO-CAR study, and have others I have ongoing collaborations with. So, a wonderful group, not only of leaders thought leaders in the field of transplantation, incredible translational basic researchers, but also people who head up some of the biggest transplant centers in the world. So it means they bring their expertise about the market, about the science, and can also participate in the clinical validation and utility studies also.
Well, it sounds though the company's managed to corner the market in experts on kidney transplants there. So, I think
group of people.
Yeah, and I think investors can sort of like have a lot of reassurance. I mean, that's just a fantastic endorsement of the company's technology with that level of expertise sitting on the board. Just quick again, Barbara, the technology. I mean, if we're looking at sort of like success with immunotherapy, well, amino sort of like mapping into kidneys, presumably there's opportunity elsewhere as well, because I mean, go forward wise, you know, there's other transplants, you know, and there's also, I mean, big, you know, sort of real blue sky. There'll be artificial or lab-based sort of like you know, transplants and stuff. So there must be some, you know, sort of like also longer term expanding outside of the kidney area.
Yeah. So obviously, yeah, what we'll be looking to do moving forward is to look at extrapolating this into other organs. And then from the perspective of the Clarava and characterizing an individual's immunological risk, is this something that we could then apply to autoimmunity? So these are obviously things going forward that we'd look to explore further.
Okay, well, just before we wrap it up, Sarah, is there any on the news flow going forward? Are there any sort of like, we've obviously got the validation test will start sort of like the back end of this year, maybe it'll start next year, and then we'll finish next year. What are the sort of the key sort of like milestones that investors should think about?
Yeah, I'm you know, obviously we can't get into specifics, but one of the key areas is my belief that any company doesn't just operate in a vacuum. And we will be looking for, you know, some close associations, not only with the professional organizations, but other corporations and maybe academic institutions. You know, there's a wealth of opportunities in this company, and we'd like to explore some of them. You know, obviously with one eye on our pipeline, you know, without distracting our main focus on the, you know, launching those first two products. But, you know, addressing that early on is always going to be helpful. And so that's the sort of news flow that I think that investors should be looking for. Okay.
Well, I mean, it's certainly been a sort of successful path at the moment. I mean, I think it's like probably the finest example of sort of like, well, I'll class it as Russian doll investing, because you started, well, not you personally, but EKF Diagnostics spun out Renalytix, which is a huge company and successful. And then Renalytix has obviously spun out Verici. And I mean, is there any other sort of like Russian dolls which are going to appear? But don't answer that question yet, because
I wouldn't.
Exactly. I know Chris.
The secrets.
I know one of your largest shareholders, Chris Mills, is on the board as well, and he's got a fabulous reputation for unlocking value. So
yeah, 30 million. Not actually on the board, but it's great to have him as you know, obviously a big supporter of Barbara's technology here.
Okay. All right. Well, thanks very much for your time, Sarah and Barbara, and I wish you all the best going forward. I'm sure we're going to be touching base again soon. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Take care. Bye-bye.